As with this client and with kind of that rest of the industry, as they move towards this AI automation, the design system is going to serve as the guardrails that keeps the AI from generating chaos.
You end up spending maybe about 15 to 20 hours developing this dynamic roadmap, but you've saved months and months of negotiations, arguments.
And because cybersecurity can be quite condensed with information, like there's a lot of information that you have to fit on a page, it's sort of tricky from a design perspective, to be creative.
Hey everybody, welcome back to a final episode of 2025 of Make an Impact podcast. I'm your host, Makoto Kern. Our topic for today is cybersecurity. I'm joined by my host, Scott Harden.
Hello.
And Mr. Aldo.
I
just call him Mr. Aldo. Just to start this off, in the world of cybersecurity, we spend billions of dollars defending against hackers, malware, and all these different types of exploits. I don't even know the different names. Just kidding. But the biggest vulnerability is that it's not just in the code, but it's also in the confusion of using the code. We're seeing a massive trend in the industry where companies are building incredibly powerful backends, but they're handling their users who are often like stressed out. Their IT managers are trying to figure out, how to not get their company information hacked or stolen. And we're basically handing them a toolbox without a manual. And I'm calling this a guidance gap. And so today we're actually breaking down a real world case of how we help a compliance focused cybersecurity firm. They kind of fell into that marketing trap where they're building pretty dashboards, or they're building an interface that it looks pretty much outdated. It has all the features that they think their users want, but it actually makes it really difficult for people to do their jobs. The users are drowning in all this different noise, information, inconsistencies in the design. And so we want to talk a little bit more in detail about how we came about with starting the project, how we helped lead some of their strategic pieces, and then how we actually help implement and tactically launch a much better product in the end. And so I think this is a good point for us to dive into this. And to kind of start us off, Aldo and Scott, they've been part of this whole journey with this client. And I think Scott and Aldo, I don't know if you have anything to add to get us started with how we first started off with this project.
Yeah, no, thanks for setting us up. I think that the main sort of takeaway with this client as we engage with them is trying to focus the client from a lot of different goals, possibly misalignment from what leadership intends and what the organization understands. And so I think we were brought into this project by chief product officer that had utilized our services with another client. So they knew when they brought us on that we would help refocus the product organization pretty effectively and pretty quickly. And so a real initial goal at the outset was to help them develop an intentional, user-centric and measurable product roadmap. The platform was undergoing sort of the aches and creaks of a tech debt kind of situation where different pieces of the components were not quite aligned from a code-based perspective and then also from a user experience perspective. And so to really unify that under a really compliance-focused cybersecurity journey, we had to kind of take a step back with them and really bring the core stakeholders of the company together to get that alignment necessary to really move forward in a rapid way, in an intentional way. So I think that was really our first order of business.
Yeah, and I think we start off this whole journey, and what we do is, as UX designers, we go through what we call like a heuristic analysis. And what that is basically we're trying to discover and learn more about what the application looks like, and we base it off of 10 different type of principles that we do during this analysis. And I won't go through all of them, but it's consistency of standards, error prevention, kind of a match between like the real world and the system, using different type of copy that's familiar with the user, visibility system status. These are all different heuristic analysis that we actually rate on a scale. And then we go through the entire system and we rank that. And that way we get familiar with the system. At the same time, we report out what we're finding. And as you're going through this, we're seeing many different kind of faults that come up that when you don't take a holistic look, when you're just looking at specific pages,
Yeah.
you might miss that. And so, like, one of the major things that we found, I mean, just from a UI perspective, is the sizes of buttons, the names of buttons, the color of buttons. I mean,
Right.
there must have been 50 different styles. And just what that does is it creates cognitive load for the user. So if they're doing something in one part of the application and they go to another part of the application and it functions differently, things are in different places or whatever, you're just adding to this complexity and the noise that the user has to go through when they're trying to do something quickly or trying to find something effectively without making mistakes.
Yeah. What we found, what we saw when we looked at their existing platform, it's very dashboard heavy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the common sort of trap that you see in this case is marketing companies will kind of bring this to bear in terms of the pretty dashboard aspect. It may look at first read that the dashboard is attractive to the user, but if dashboards are complex beasts, they can look good, but they may have very little UX value. And when you actually ask them to do something or track something or scale something, the usefulness of them breaks down pretty quickly. And I think we've seen that a number of times where a dashboard is the sort of initial discovery falls off, and there's very actually low continual usage of the dashboard because it's not actually really doing what the user expects it to do. It's widget heavy, and there really hasn't been a lot of thought into the overall user journey beyond, the initial interaction with the dashboard. So, and I think we found that in this case.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And especially because dashboards in general are just focused on information, where especially in the case of cybersecurity, the dashboard should actually lead to action. And it's generally in the case of this client it's layers deep under a few different tabs where you actually had to go to, and just the navigation to get from the dashboard to where you actually have to address the problem wasn't structured enough. I think it's a amalgamation of not using a dashboard to its full potential, the mix of the different types of UI and structure wise, and then as you mentioned, the essential information architecture and user journeys wasn't mapped out just because of the project being sort of built sort of phases to phases, addressed it like this page does this and this page does that. That's why the heuristic evaluation proved to be so effective in this case.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of prescriptiveness, I think, too. Also, compliance journey is very complex, and it generally requires a bit of prescriptiveness, especially for folks that maybe are not as adept at compliance. It could be small business owners, it could be organizations that don't have a huge cybersecurity, operation. And so I think we sort of adopted the phrase, the drinking from a fire hose in the case of what we saw, because there's a lot of pieces to it, a lot of components, a lot of widgets, but not a lot of prescriptiveness, not a lot of, if you're going to prepare for an audit, if you're going to prepare for any kind of assessment of your compliance status or readiness, you're kind of left to fend for yourself. And I think that's, some of the challenges we saw in the heuristic analysis was that completion of the attended tasks would fall off, that we wouldn't see customers going through the entire process.
Yeah. When it comes to compliance, obviously people are terrified of getting that wrong. What am I doing that is going to be either caught or not caught? Instead of reducing it, we're amplifying it because they're trying to go through the system that isn't as user friendly as it should be. A lot of companies out there that you've seen in the news lately, they're doing a ton of acquisitions. They're grabbing different smaller companies, merging them together and merging their products together, and you're going to get this amalgamation of just this Frankenstein type of thing that they're putting together. Different product owners and different designers doing different things, and so having that holistic view of putting things together so it is coming together in the most effective way. This is
Yeah.
something that companies don't have. They don't have that holistic approach.
Well, and it shows. If you looked at it was a rather organically grown platform, right? So disjointed modules, inconsistency in user experience. As I mentioned before, tech debt, the goal was to really unify that experience from the various, bring the various components together through a common design language. And I think, Aldo, you really had a hand in kind of ensuring that it doesn't feel like the user is traversing through multiple applications, but really using one holistic platform and feeling like they're guided every step of the way, and that they feel like, I can see the end. I know where I'm going. I know where I am now. I have situational awareness as to my pathway. Those sound like obvious goals for an organization that's trying to guide companies through a security analysis, but easier said than done, really, when you get to, some of the technical liabilities that you have.
I think before we
Yes.
jump into like the implementation side, I think this is a good starting point to actually get to the strategy piece, because that's what we always do
Yeah.
first. Scott, I'll have you explain kind of how to the audience, like, how do we get from that chaos at the beginning, and then we get into this strategy piece and into a clear roadmap, so then we can actually implement and do the tactical side of things for our clients.
Yeah, so this client was a great example of how we typically begin projects with our clients. We call it impact immersion. And what we really seek to do is bring together, about 8 to 10 core stakeholders in the business. Immersion works when we have high enough decision makers that can affect change when we're done with the process. And that can be, an interdisciplinary group, and it's usually better if it is. Folks from marketing, folks from product, folks from sales, the CEO, ideally, if they can participate, but if not, members of their C-suite. But it's really important to have, like I said before, the people that at the end of the day, we're going to make some core decisions about what's important, what ties to business objectives and customer value. And, you have to, it really start at the top as far as that goes, people that can actually motivate the organization forward from what we come up with. The end result is a dynamic, intentional, customer-focused roadmap. And that appears in different forms based on different client needs. But the process to get there is by and large a lean canvas. There's no secret sauce, as it really, what we bring to the table is the facilitation of alignment to that end. And it happens in a very short period of time. You end up spending maybe about 15 to 20 hours developing this dynamic roadmap, but you've saved months and months of negotiations, arguments, politics. So it tends to be a process that's really unifying. It kind of builds a we culture, and then everyone feels like they have a piece of the success that comes from it. So in this case, we started our immersion process. All of this was conducted virtually for this exercise. The organization is rather distributed across the country. And so we used a tool called Miro, which we'll show examples of. But it was an opportunity for us to do several key things. One, declare what are the business objectives that are important for the organization. We're big OKR people here. What that means is objectives and key results. It's a success measuring framework. It basically motivates the organization to declare some SMART goals, if you will. And then from that, those cascade down through the organization, through the product organization, into operations, marketing, support, you name it. And then that gets everybody aligned to sort of a North Star as to, what success looks like over the next X number of years. So we started with that. We got everyone together virtually, introduced ourselves, did a few icebreaker games to get everybody energized. The first step was really to define a problem statement. Why are we here? What are we hoping to achieve by doing this work? So the first question that we ask is, what are the business objectives that we should be trying to achieve with improving this platform? And so what we'll throw out is, start with a verb and, be audacious a little bit in your expectation of growth. In this case, the organization came back with some key objectives of being able to deliver an excellent experience to a cybersecurity service provider and allow them, these are their partners, to grow along with their customers and execute at scale. So that was goal number one. Goal number two was to reduce churn. They were having a lot of, because of defective quality, the platform having the tech debt, not as modern as they would like it to be, they were noticing a lot of customer churn, customers giving the platform a shot and then bailing pretty early. And then the third was to really demonstrate thought leadership to the industry at large by being at the forefront of cybersecurity through innovation and prescriptive journeys, guiding their customers along. So those were really the key objectives. And then from there, we basically said, our second step was to really say, we have these North Stars declared for the business. What do customers want? Who are we designing for? Who are those customers? And we spent a bit of time determining, sort of the core users of what the current platform is and what the improved platform would have the opportunity to capture. And so what they identified was, one of their core customers was a service provider, a partner. And those are the folks, that they contract with to take their platform and offer compliance audits, compliance preparation, I should say, as part of their services to their customers. So if you sort of think of the partner as the kind of middle person, the middleman in the relationship between our client and the partner's customers. And then the second, the sort of secondary relationship customer that they deal with is, direct relationships with customers themselves, so that they do all of the kind of consulting. They act as the partner in this case. And then they contract directly with an end customer that would use their compliance management services in lieu of a partner. Those are really sort of the two core users that we were designing for or would be designing for an improved platform. Then the next step is to really map out the way they're using the platform today. We call that a journey map. And it's important because what it does is it lays out visually for participants where customers are having the biggest challenges with the current state platform. And we call those pain points. And so it's really helpful to kind of zero in and target those core moments of frustration, maybe that the platform isn't clear enough, or the user is not feeling that they are supported enough in their compliance preparation journey. And so we go through that process, and then we were able to identify some really key moments where the current state platform is really falling down in terms of providing, like we said, that sort of prescriptiveness of, I feel like I'm being handheld through this process. And then after that, we zero in on those pain points and then say, what are some of the solutions or features that the participants can think of? Everybody's got great ideas, right? But we want to target the good ideas to where we're actually are seeing the most value if we improve the user experience. So we do a brainstorming session. It's called a feature roundup, and everybody comes up with, based on the pain points identified in the customer journey, what would be a solution to address that. And so we get a full board filled with ideas. And then the next step is to zero in on the highest value features that we could execute in the shortest possible time to improve and meet the goals that we established.
Yeah, I think at that stage, what was also quite apparent is that there was a bunch of great ideas from the team members itself. It was a space for them to also have a quick voice into what goes in and their experiences. That's sort of what forms a good sort of relationship during strategy in initial phases, is essentially sort of giving the voice to the team members inside of the company that generally didn't have it. That's something that I definitely saw. There was some great ideas that popped up during these sessions as well.
And I think part of it is we're encouraging the participants not to be, this is a safe space, in other words, to dream a little bit.
Yes.
I'm curious, in video games, cheat codes let you skip months of grinding to unlock special abilities instantly. Have you ever wished for something similar for your software challenges? What if there's a way to instantly access 20 plus years of specialized expertise instead of developing it all internally? What if you could solve in weeks what might otherwise take months or years? Would you agree that most organizations face a steep learning curve when implementing new software solutions? At my company Impact, we serve as that cheat code for companies looking to transform complex software into intuitive experiences that users love and that drive real business results. Would it be valuable to explore? And how might this work for your specific situation? Visit impact.io for a free strategy session focused on your unique challenges.
There's going to be some safe, we know this is something I know, if I'm asked what solutions would I have, what features would I develop, I'm probably going to come up with pretty safe ones, but I'm also being encouraged to come up with wild ideas. I think that's what's key about immersion is that we really try to break down the silos that an organization can have when innovating. And that's the whole purpose of it. So it's really important for us to create an environment where everybody feels like, hey, in the past, I may have been, knocked on the head for coming up with this wild idea, but that's not going to happen here. You're going to come up with a bold new idea because of your experience with the customer, and we're going to respect that. We have a way to triage it. If it's something that costs a lot of money or has a lot of risk, there's a place for that. We may not work on it right away, but we have a way to validate that good idea. That's where we head with this feature roundup. And so at the end of the day, we have a kind of a unique voting system where essentially we break all of the ideas that are developed into 4 quadrants. We'll show an example of that, but essentially there's a XY coordinate map that all of the ideas land in 1 of 4 quadrants. If it's an idea that has low risk, meaning we think that the customer will adopt this idea pretty readily, and that we also feel like it has, value as far as the customer goes, it goes in the upper left quadrant. And we call that the low hanging fruit quadrant. So those ideas that come forward are implemented right away. We know we need to get after those things. They will be adopted. They're not going to cost us a lot of money, or heads won't roll if those ideas fail. Then we have the sort of dream ideas that we talked about in this exercise. Maybe those things we think those ideas have value, but it's riskier. We have to get it right. We think we have a good idea, but we need to kind of remix and improve it until it's just right. And those go in the upper right quadrant, which is our test before build quadrant. And those are the things that Impact can help conceptualize the idea, build rapid prototypes, do user testing, do all the good things that take an idea and get it ready for prime time. Then we have ideas that they're low risk in terms of adoption, but they're not that valuable based on what we've identified about the customer. They don't quite solve the pain points as well as we'd hope. And we call those table stakes. Maybe we have to have them because our competitors do, but they're not really going to, reinvent the wheel for us. And then lastly, we have ideas that we think are high risk and they're kind of low value from a customer standpoint. And you know what you do with those? You don't do anything with those. You put those in we call it the nah quadrant. Those are things that, hey, it was good effort to come up with them, but we are declaring that we don't think we should proceed with those ideas at this time. And what that all does is it creates a map where everyone can kind of stand back and say, okay, now we've prioritized where we need to go, and we've really put some stakes in the ground in terms of intention. And so the last piece of the immersion is laying that all out on a timeline, and all of those things that we said were low-hanging fruit. For the next X period of time, maybe the next 6 months, we're going to get to work on those. Impact can help design pretty effective user experience artifacts, and then do some rapid testing on those ideas so that customers can weigh in. But most importantly, it's about getting value into the hands of the engineering team so that they can actually build those things out. What that all drives to is we develop a dynamic roadmap. All of the features from the roundup in the low-hanging fruit quadrant and in the innovation quadrant become swim lanes in the roadmap. And so the low-hanging fruit really becomes the next X number of months, typically, the next 6 months. And so Impact goes to work in helping the client develop the necessary design artifacts. And we'll talk about that in a minute in terms of, rapid implementation of design ops and all the artifacts that come from that. And then meanwhile, we also have what we call really a discovery track of work, which are to incubate some of those bigger ideas that were in the upper right quadrant. And what that does is it allows the organization to kind of leapfrog over today and think about the long term or the longer term. Those activities tend to look like design sprints, concept design opportunities, rapid prototyping, user validation, testing, and that just continuously goes while we're working on the more immediate stuff. And so I think what I'll do is hand off to Aldo for the immediate stuff and what we did next.
So before we do that, let me just summarize all that all that information into just a few different things where, it really comes down to three things. When you're doing the strategy piece, you're trying to get business alignment, you're trying to understand the user, and you're trying to understand your risk, basically features, and create a roadmap from that. Those three things during that process, what that does is it helps your team actually come together, because what's going to happen is in the next stage is your design team is going to start designing things, and they're going to have to go to each one of those leaders or SMEs or whoever it is and ask these questions, and everybody's going to churn. And if they don't talk with each other and they're not all in alignment at the beginning, then that stage where you think you're bypassing and going right to design, you think you're moving faster, but in all reality, you're not. You're moving slower, and you're getting information from everybody who's not aligned, which in the end can be all changed by somebody at the top who says, no, let's just change this. And that's the problem that we see every time when we talk to leadership and they want to go jump right into design because there's no strategy, or they think they have a roadmap, they think they have a strategy, but it has not been communicated effectively across the organization. And so what happens is that you're actually thinking that you're shortcutting the system to launch faster, but you're not. And you're launching something that your users may not even want to use in the end. And now in the age of AI, if you're thinking of shortcutting things because your competitors now can move faster because they can code things faster, they can copy you faster, this is where the strategy piece becomes even more important, done right the first time, because you need your speed and direction. Now in this next Act 3, this is the whole tactical side of things, where you now have an idea of what you want to build, what's the most riskier things that you need to build, and what are the things that we could just hand off to dev. And so all those going to kind of walk through that tactical side of things of being a designer who has gone through this strategy piece, has talked with product owners and leadership that has gone through the strategy exercise, and now has the understanding of what questions to ask, what to focus on, so then they can design the right thing for the client. So the implementation side, the acceleration, and the design ops side. Aldo, take us away.
I think what I just also want to add on to that is that during the strategic sort of phase is we also recognize, especially from my side, I recognized a few sort of key players in the team that had very good knowledge, very good ideas, was easy to communicate with. And I essentially tried to utilize them during the tactical and implementation side. And that essentially sped things up a lot. As Makoto, as you said, if we skipped that process, I wouldn't have realized that, and the process would have actually been quite longer in that case. But after we did that, we had a few parallels that we essentially ran. We started with rapid prototyping to validate some of these low-hanging fruits, while simultaneously stepping into the design system that we could build, that when we get to the actual designing and implementation phase, that these parallels essentially match up to each other and we can move at the speed that we want to. As you said, during this day and age where AI is actually speeding things up a lot. So we wanted to keep up with that momentum. And we actually got a lot of good insights during this rapid prototyping, validating the user flow, getting feedback. talking to the product owners, devs, and sort of brainstorming and mind mapping some of the things additionally post the strategy that essentially guided some of the design system components that we had to design as a whole. During that phase, it's actually where you can see the collaborative spirits coming together, as well as to see everyone's experiences actually coinciding in a file on Figma. And that's essentially where the magic happens. To sort of connect everything together, we identified in the heuristic evaluations that the biggest low-hanging fruits was the implementation of the design system in the form of buttons and just consistent layouts. So that's essentially what we focused on first, that we could implement sort of almost immediately in the current app, is just sort of replacing the buttons, making sure that the contrast is good, because they recently went through like a rebrand as well, but their primary colors failed the contrast test. So we had to make a few adjustments on that. And after we did that, the sort of whole structure that we could implement through the update of the design system actually played a massive role in the speed that we could move forward. But yeah.
One thing I want to explain just before we get into it, a lot of people may not even know what a design system is. At a very high level, when you're a designer and you're in your software and you're designing components, you have to hand off to the front end development team eventually. And so they're sitting there traditionally waiting for, hey, what do I need? I need to start building stuff. I need to start coding things. What does it look like? And a lot of times that we're seeing is that there's a big ratio difference between designer versus the development team. There's usually one designer for like 20 devs. And so they're coding these systems. And if there's a front end that they need to code and they're not seeing how it should look like or whatever, a design system, what that does is it accelerates a lot of that ambiguity. So we create a single source of truth through that design system. But the most important thing is if you start to design the single source of truth right away and you're very still fluid and it's still dynamically changing, you're wasting your time trying to develop that thing first, that design system. But once things are stabilized and you have, okay, this is what form fields look like. We're using a material front end system. We're using whatever the case is, whatever you can do to accelerate from wireframe Figma files to actual code, that's just going to get you to the end result faster. So this design system that we keep talking about, this is such an important thing to help aid in that handoff between front end and dev. But also, if the product owners, they want to reference, hey, I want to think of something to build, they could pull from these components and it really helps.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, in terms of doing some of these foundational things now, selling the client on the benefits of these things often involves saying, invest in infrastructure for your design organization, because you're going to see it pay huge dividends. We see acceleration, 50, 75% faster to market on big ideas because you've taken the time at the outset to really invest in design systems, ensuring that, you have the processes in place to rock and roll, when it matters. And I think most importantly, once you're testing your ideas with customers, if you're finding out that maybe you went down a wrong path with a big idea, with these types of structures in place, you can turn on a dime and it doesn't cost you a lot of money. So it goes back to that risk reduction piece that we talked about in the beginning, which is really IIMPACT. We're your risk reduction partner in this process, so that you feel like you can accelerate and be innovative again without a lot of risk.
100%.
The biggest point here that we want to make is that you are a company. You're not a startup anymore. You want to you're scaling your systems, you're scaling your processes. You can't do that if you just keep going with the same kind of, I say, Mickey Mouse system of just roughing it, putting together a very messy system, and then just churning. That system's going to break down when you try to scale. So we're trying to help companies actually scale to a more mature organization. So then when you can spit out things faster, more with higher quality, less problems throughout the system. This is called design.
How did
ops.
Mickey Mouse get to a place where he was just poor Mickey?
I know. I feel bad.
Oh boy.
I mean, what's wrong? I thought that was an innovative idea, and Walt Disney executed Mickey Mouse pretty quickly in the beginning without a lot of maybe he followed the immersion process in the beginning to come up with Mickey Mouse. So I think he's
Am I going to get
I
copyright
think he's going to get a bad
violations?
rap here.
Yeah, let's just, Aldo, if you want to continue with your
Yeah.
story. Sorry for the interruption, but I think
No,
those are
Mickey
important
Mouse
points.
people.
yeah, these Mickey Mouse people. No, I think what I can add onto it is that yes, it's a good investment, especially from a design ops perspective, to get a good design system in place because you can pivot as much as you'd like with it. You can experiment with it. Especially sort of the method
Absolutely.
that we followed was to get the design system in place and design a few templates of how your big main components should look like. By main components, I'm talking about pages, I'm talking about slide outs, navigation, sort of things that doesn't necessarily change as often or that you need to populate with content. And because cybersecurity can be quite condensed with information, like there's a lot of information that you have to fit on a page, it's sort of tricky to, from a design perspective, to be creative, but not sort of deviate too far that you'd lose a good experience. And that's essentially where the design system played a massive role for us to not just make sure we're in the constraints of good, consistent user experience, but also to make sure that we can test 3, 4, 5 ideas in a span of 3 to 5 days and validate it against sort of in this stage just against each other, giving feedback, exploring, because at that stage I was also only just learning the product from a actual I'm in there perspective. But our main goal was to, with these templates in mind, was for them to also be able to go in there, conceptualize, drag and drop. So essentially think of, I'm giving you a bunch of Legos, they're already designed. You can just go and stack them, see if it works, see what comes out. And if it works, then we test it. And that's essentially the methodology that we followed. And I think a good segue into that is that the handoff in that stage is that everything is detailed, documented, and structured in a way that bridges the gap between design and development, as you mentioned, Makoto, where the button that I used is already coded in your design or your code repository to say this button has been used there. So it's essentially a good way for us to make sure that everything matches from design into development. That's essentially the player that's coming into question a lot now is the big AI factor of design to dev handover, where I think your design system plays one of the biggest roles ever now because of the models out there that you can now either design from your code repository or code from your design system in just a normal Figma file and build it from there. It's essentially a split or a merge that's taking place now, and your design system in itself is probably the highest valuable thing that you can get from a design side or a strategic and implementation side from your idea business or anything that you're actually tackling.
And I think this is a good time to maybe recap kind of this entire journey of this case study, where we go from chaos to kind of order to the future product of what we've done. And basically we started with a client that was facing a massive kind of guidance gap where their users were drinking from a fire hose of data and paralyzed by a widget overload. And Scott, you walked us through the strategy of moving through from a kind of like a static database of requirements to more of a dynamic smart checklist of like basically where we used intentionality and immersion to cut through all the noise and focus on compliant readiness rather than just data dumps. Obviously, Aldo showed us how a design system isn't about making things just looking consistent, but it's also about like acceleration, that getting that quick 1 to 2 day turnaround on new features. I think in the end, we didn't just build like a component library, but we gave them a process and a design system and a way in which they can continue to innovate faster without all the waste that goes in with immature organizations that don't have this all put together. So you're able to turn around things and ideas much faster than they were ever before. I think as with this client and with kind of that rest of the industry, as they move towards this AI automation, the design system is going to serve as the guardrails that keeps the AI from generating chaos. Because obviously, as you implement more and more AI, there's situations in which it will hallucinate, it will cause issues, and if you don't have experts in there that have set up these things, you may be leveraging something that is force multiplying something bad versus something good, and they can innovate faster now without sacrificing the trust from their users. So I think just to wrap it up, whether you're in detection, prevention, or compliance, are kind of like immersion to strategy to system actually application and go to market launch. That blueprint is the approach that we're trying to scale for any client for 2026. So if you want to stop building these tech heavy debt products and really start building intentional products. I just want to thank the audience thanks for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your 2025, and we're looking forward to 2026. And thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. All right, take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Have you ever played a video game and discovered a cheat code that instantly unlocks abilities that would have taken months to develop? I'm curious, what would it mean for your business if you could access a similar cheat code for your software challenges? What if you could bypass months of trial and error and immediately tap into proven expertise? I've noticed that many organizations spend years developing specialized software expertise internally, often through costly mistakes and setbacks. Would you agree that's a common challenge in your industry as well? At my company, IIIMPACT, we function as that cheat code for companies looking to transform complex software into intuitive experiences. Our clients gain immediate access to 20 plus years of specialized knowledge and an experience of launching hundreds of software digital products in many different industries without having to develop it all internally. You might be wondering, how does this actually translate to business results? Well, companies we work with typically see go-to-market times reduced by up to 50%, their overall NPS scores rocket up, and their product to development teams' efficiency significantly improved. Instead of struggling through costly mistakes, they accelerate directly to solutions that work. This is why organizations from startups to Fortune 500 partners with us for years. We consistently help them solve problems in weeks that might otherwise take months or years. If you're responsible for digital transformation or product development, wouldn't it make sense to at least explore whether this cheat code could work for your specific challenges? From boardroom ideas to code, this is what we do best. Visit our website at IIIMPACT.io. You can see the link below to schedule a free strategy session. It's just a conversation about your unique situation, not a sales pitch. And you'll walk away with valuable insights regardless of whether we end up working together. Thank you.